I know people who do what we do out here in Los Angeles who have gone into a 3,500 square foot home and walked out, or put down a proposal for $35,000, $40,000 worth of testing, right? Could I do that? Sure, I could. But can I prove the same condition with inside the property that has the same remediation process with less dollar expenditure in testing? Most cases, yeah. And that's what we're trying to do as an approach. We want to go into this, Galen, with the mindset that we're trying to be reasonable about this from a financial perspective with the insurance carrier, so that they can't turn around and say, you're just trying to spike a bill, you're trying to cash in and go to the bank on this event. No, I'm trying to be pragmatic about it.
From humble beginnings, Insurance Claim HQ has grown to one of the largest property casualty firms in the country. We didn't do it alone, and you shouldn't either. Every week, we're talking to claims professionals and top experts from all over, all to help you grow your business and make you stronger. Let's level up together. I'm Galen Hair. Welcome to the Level Up Claims Podcast.
Fire losses are some of the most misunderstood and mishandled claims in the industry. From toxic residue to peer-reviewed science, most contractors and adjusters simply aren't equipped to handle them. This leaves property owners at risk. Today, we're going to dive into why fire may be the biggest growth opportunity in property claims with Jonathan Bowers. He's the Executive Director of Clean Environmental Solutions. They've led over 1,000 fire projects, from residential losses to major catastrophes like the Marshall Fire, Lahaina, and even the recent LA fires. Let's welcome Jonathan Bowers. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Galen, thank you for having me. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm pretty good, man. This is one of my favorite things I get to do, because basically I get to sit down with people I already like, or I already know I'm going to like, and we get to talk about things I like doing. So this is by far the best part of what I do every day. And anything to get me, out of the deposition room, out of the courtroom for a little bit to do something like this.
Sure, it's a good relief, huh?
No, it's a huge relief. So let's do some of that. Before we jump into it, because I've got so many questions. I want to talk about all these California fires. I want to talk about where things are headed.
Sure.
I want to talk about some of the developments we've seen. But let's get to know you a little bit. How did you get into this crazy world?
It's a great question, Galen. I went to school at the University of Buffalo. I got my degrees in economics and German. And from then on, I got into the corporate world a little bit, realized that wasn't for me. This was about 30 years ago, and I just started companies, and some of them have done really well and some of them have failed. But when it comes down to it, my brother and I started this company about 10 years ago, and we were both living in Florida at the time, and Hurricane Matthew had hit our backyard just after we had started this company, Clean Environmental Solutions, and we really got thrown into the deep water, so to speak, right after we got licensed with this. So that turned into a really successful business with hurricanes. And over the years, we have morphed it into testing for urban wildfires and structure fires. And we can get into the reasons why in a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I'd love to talk about. So yeah, obviously you can't be in your field without doing water work. But I think right now, where people are the most lost is in the fire world. And I also think the whole world about urban fires and wildfires, people don't necessarily understand, why they should care about the difference. So let's start with that. I think fundamentally we know what an urban fire is and what a wildfire is, but how do they need to be treated differently?
In a couple of different ways. That's a really good question. There are a lot of parallels with them, but when we got into urban wildfires about 7 years ago, it was right around the time of the Marshall Fire in Colorado. And the prevailing opinion in the insurance industry was organic material, it's not toxic, just go ahead and clean it up and you'll be just fine. And what science has proven in the last several years, the University of Boulder, Colorado actually just pushed out a 1.5 year long study that is fascinating. I can get that information if you want to put it in your show note links. But
yeah, we'd love to.
Yeah. So what they confirmed was that these microparticles, which are under 2.5 micrograms, what they'll actually do is they'll pass through your lung tissue, your alveoli, and get into your blood system. And that's really bad because there's no way for your body to filter that out of your blood. except through your liver and kidneys, and they're not designed to do that, Galen. So what happens is they just basically stay in your liver and kidneys for the rest of your life until it creates some sort of disease, kidney or liver disease, down the line in the future. So even if it's just a situation where the fire, like in Lake Tahoe a couple years, where the majority, like the overwhelmingly high percentage, like 99.8% of the material that burned were trees and brush, that particulate matter still needs to be addressed. And it's not as easy as just wiping it off to clean it up. Because if you don't, that's, first of all, it's going to permeate into your clothes potentially and into your soft porous materials. But also, if it's not dealt with properly, it's going to continue to cycle through the air inside your property. And as it's cycling, you're continuing to breathe it in and ingest it. So for the fires like Lahaina and the Los Angeles fire, where you had the urban element that was interfacing with the fire, a big component of that is the buildings that actually burn. So the building materials, whether it's plastic or metal or electronics or rubber, big thing these days are electric vehicles with the lithium and nickel batteries. Those produce so much toxicity. And with these urban wildfire events, they create their own weather system inside the actual area. So convection, the law of convection, hot air rises and cool air falls. It creates this cyclical event that creates massive wind speeds, which were evidenced in Lahaina and LA, of up to 100 miles an hour. And those are the equivalent of what, Galen? Category 2 hurricane, right?
Hurricane.
Right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, when they're looking at these properties and evaluating them from a professional perspective, they don't consider things like wind speeds. They just look for physical damage or physical contamination, but they fail to evaluate the 100-mile-an-hour wind speeds. So those wind speeds in some of these older structures and even the newer structures will force, it creates a positive pressure event outside the property. There's a negative pressure event inside the property. And what happens is that pressure wants to equilibrate. So the air from the outside gets inside the home. It can get into the wall cavities, the attic cavities underneath the crawl spaces. And it contaminates the entire home with not only just the microfine particulate, but also things like heavy metals and hydrogen cyanide and furan and dioxins. There's a whole litany of different types of toxins that you can test for in these events. And hopefully we'll get into talking about what's reasonable and what's not reasonable from a testing perspective. But that's the kind of the difference between a wildfire and a structure fire. Is you have a kitchen, you might have left a burner on and you forgot about the chicken that you were frying in the pan. That creates a pressurized event inside the house. And protein fires are really dangerous, but what it does is it pressurizes that smoke into the rest of the home, and that can also infiltrate wall cavities. And the investigation process for the two of them are very similar, but you really do have to know some of the nuanced differences on how to investigate one versus the other.
And that kind of does bring us to our next topic. You said you want to cover testing, and I want to, but I want to kind of segue because there was a lot of information in that answer. And I think anyone listening at home, it's one of those things, they agree with you because it makes sense, right? But not a lot of people necessarily knew that going into hearing it. So for instance, talking about the wind speeds, talking about the convection process, the house trying to reach an equilibrium, those are huge. But again, you're right. Lots of people don't really investigate. I've never heard a carrier address wind speeds in a fire, right? Ever.
There's a good reason for that, right?
Ever. Well, yeah, there's plenty of incentive. But even your discussion about how the organic matter is not necessarily harmless. Again, we're creating and consuming so many things these days with so many toxic aspects. So what is the approach? Like now there's a fire. I call you. I want you to come investigate and do testing. How are you going to approach this?
That's a great question, too. The way we approach it is from a very holistic perspective. So, the people that we have on our team are very experienced with not only the facets of indoor environmental practice and industrial hygiene, but also we understand building science and how buildings respond to these types of positive and negative air pressure events, the heat exposure that, the heat and the wind exposure that they're exposed to. So what we generally do is we try to do an investigation as cost effectively as possible to achieve the desired scientific results necessary to prove beyond a reasonable doubt gross contamination within a structure. Now, if there is no contamination, that's great, right? It doesn't matter to me if there's contamination or not. What we're trying to prove is whether or not the structure is safe to inhabit for the person who is going to be inhabiting it after the event. So when we go in and take a look at a property, first thing we do is generally we do a walk around the exterior of the property to see if there was any kind of debris strikes or any kind of breaches in the building envelope to see where there might be exposure that has gotten into the building other than the windows and the doors and maybe some of the attic ventilation systems. After that, we inspect the entire inside of the property. And one of the things that the carriers like to push back on, especially with these urban wildfire events, there may be some dust at the front door or on the windowsill. Carrier doesn't usually like to want to quantify that. They just say, go ahead, Galen, and grab a wet rag and clean that stuff up and handle it yourself and you'll be right as rain. Well, we don't get crazy. Even when there's debris all over the place, we still want to grab a couple of samples to confirm or deny the composition of what that is. Because if we don't test for it, it's easy for the carrier to turn around and say, well, that's just dust. That's nothing you need to worry about. We shouldn't be concerned about it. So if you're looking for heavy metals, if you're looking for combustion byproducts that have been empirically proven as toxic to the human body when ingested, now you have the foundation to build the rest of the loss.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and there's a few things even to break down there. Don't get me started on the just go wipe it down yourself. First of all, I don't know when the insurance policy started having a requirement for the insured to do manual labor as part of the loss, but that's a whole separate issue. Even assuming it was safe, which I think where you're taking me is it likely is not safe, right?
Of course not. I mean, so to advise you to do that, Galen, is one thing. But if you were to go and take a restoration company and tell them to go do the same thing, like it was just regular dust, that's a massive OSHA violation, right? If you were to send a team of your employees in just without any kind of PPE, I mean, you're already breaking federal requirements right there.
Yeah, crazy that you can't do it, but the carrier wants me to just do it on my own.
And they're relying on the fact that most people have never gone through these situations, just like hurricanes. And a lot of people trust their carriers, don't they?
Yeah, and they don't know that it doesn't pass the smell test.
That's exactly right.
Which brings us to smell.
Hey.
Okay, there you go. Look, I didn't even do that on purpose. So that was kind of when I first got into this space, what feels like many, many years ago. That was kind of what got me into it was smell, honestly. There was a fire claim. I was a GP. I'd done defense work. And, this fire claim came in. And even after the carrier paid to have everything cleaned, this client's stuff just smelled terrible. Smelled terrible, right? But that's kind of a very layperson test. Like, it still smells bad, right? So let's talk about it. Like I've been in properties years after a fire and it still smells. But what type of testing are you doing? What type of chemicals are you looking for that are contributing to these types of after smells?
Well, it depends. A structure fire is different than a wildfire, and we will test for other types of contaminants like volatile organic compounds, or if it was a battery, we test for lithium and nickel pretty extensively. With urban wildfires, there's a test called the CAM-17, which is a broad spectrum assessment for 17 different toxic metals that are resulting elements of burned homes. But what we typically look for are combustion byproducts. And the reason why, if we can prove that we don't go crazy with the metal sampling, but we focus more on combustion byproducts, because if we find a little bit of metal inside the house, it's reasonable to infer that the rest of the house has that if there's combustion byproduct, right? So the carriers will sit there and tell you that because they found it at the front door and at the back door. The dispersion pattern is only 5 feet, which is ridiculous. But they'll say, well, we only have to clean those areas around the windows and the doors. But the way air cycles throughout a house, it's going to take it all throughout the entire home. So we investigate not only the perimeter or the exterior wall areas, but the interior walls as well. Because if, say, for example, the air conditioning unit or the heater unit was running at the time of the event, that's distributing all of that toxicity to every part of the house. And you have to investigate it. And if it comes back clear, great. But if it's contaminated, now you know that you have to address that as part of the claim.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many wildfire claims we have right now where, A, they don't even want to replace the HVAC, much less they don't want to acknowledge that the HVAC made it so much worse.
Yeah.
Just so much worse.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors to that too.
So talk to me a little more. We talked about kind of, you do that initial test. You talked about the CAM 17, you called it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another kind of battery of testing that you typically will do?
Well, yeah. I mean, you can test for dioxins and furans. You can test for hydrogen cyanide. There's a plethora of tests that you can do. Many of them are extremely expensive. And what we try to do as a company, we try not, like, I know people who do what we do out here in Los Angeles who have gone into a 3,500 square foot home and walked out, or put down a proposal for $35,000, $40,000 worth of testing, right? Mm-hmm. Could I do that? Sure, I could. But can I prove the same condition with inside the property that has the same remediation process with less dollar expenditure in testing? In most cases, yeah. And that's what we're trying to do as an approach. We want to go into this, Galen, with the mindset that we're trying to be reasonable about this from a financial perspective with the insurance carrier, so that they can't turn around and say, you're just trying to spike a bill, you're trying to cash in and go to the bank on this event. No, I'm trying to be pragmatic about it, right? So yeah. If we always throw a reservation of rights into our protocol, where if the carrier wants to dispute our findings or won't accept them, then we'll go back and test for all that stuff that's going to get the bill up to $30,000. But we've never had to actually execute on that, because the testing methodology that we do we get peer reviewed all the time, but we've never had a protocol to date, knock on wood, vacated or dismissed or had a significant change order to it, because the methodology is sound.
Nice. And that's so important, is to have someone with that methodology, right? So let's kind of transition, because I'm sure the people listening at home are now getting antsy. They're like, yeah, I know there's lots of testing to do. But their biggest problem is getting things bought. And obviously one answer is to hire a company like yours, right? To get that testing and get that protocol written. But you don't practice as one now, but you actually are also a public adjuster by trade, right?
Yeah, I'm licensed in several states, and I haven't actually really applied that trade in about 5 years. But
Good for you.
It's been a useful designation to have, because first and foremost, it would be a conflict of interest, obviously, if I repped the same client that we did testing services for. But I can give as much free advice as I want. And with the license, it's not up, is it?
No, definitely not.
Nope.
And no, I think it's a helpful thing to have. But I guess my question is a little bit different, which is, are there any mistakes that you see regularly that public adjusters make in this space, that some common things that you see that you're just like, oh, if you would just do it this way instead, it would work out so much better for you?
Oh, of course, Galen. I think one of the biggest parts of what you do as an attorney, and what I do or anybody does in this profession, is education, right? And even though you might have public adjusters who have been in the game for 10, 15 years, not all of them are experienced with these types of events. They may have a couple under their belt. The science in the last 5 years has just been put on the proverbial steroids. It's amazing how much research has been done in the last 5 years alone. So educating PAs and teaching them how to properly expertise a file, so that if it does wind up in your hands, you've gone through the procedural methodology of going from point A to point Z sequentially, so that you build a file where when it gets to the attorney, they're like, yeah, all of this flows and it reads like a book from page 1 to page 200 in sequential order. That's what I find a lot of public adjusters not understanding how to do with respect to these structure fires and urban wildfires. because it takes a while to get enough experience under your belt to really understand what works and what doesn't work.
No, absolutely. And I do think that time and that experience is something that just kind of it comes, but I always laugh about this. Like I go depose engineers, whether it's a wind claim, a fire claim, whatever. Okay. But I go depose engineers and I'm like, how do you know? And they're like, because I'm experienced. Well, hold on. You had to get the knowledge somewhere, right?
Right.
You did see it in the field, but something had to bear out that what you saw was actually correct. Otherwise, you've just been calling the same thing wind damage or not wind damage wrongly for years, right? So like, I thought your comment about the science advancing so much in the last 5 years is important. Because so where if I'm interested in fires, but I'm not kind of as mired in it as you, where should I be looking for scientific developments? What are some good resources, or what are some groups or companies or organizations that I should be following?
We've kind of done it more organically. If I'm going to be honest, we've done a lot of self-education. Of course, putting yourself around people who have already got experience in the game is probably the best way to begin. You never want to be the smartest guy in the room, right? But to that end, I think with any business or any profession, the learning never stops. So if you're really interested in this, some areas that there are some organizations that you can take a look at, or maybe the American Industrial Hygiene Association. They've got a really good book on wildfires and remediation and testing methodologies. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, also has some good classes that you could take. Of course, IICRC has their FSRT class, their fire smoke remediation technician class, that can get you some benchmark basic guidelines with respect to a lot of this. And then there are some other more developed programs that are out there, but those would be where I would start if I were brand new in the business.
And that's the hardest part, because a lot of these have voluntary standards, right? So the standards you're actually going to follow, you have to figure that out as a company and as an identity. How did you kind of sort through that? Because some of these standards are a little inconsistent. They're all voluntary. So what was your route for figuring out what the best protocol was going to be for you guys?
I think that's where the building science component comes into it, because when you understand how a building interacts with different conditions and you can prove it, you can take, say, a desk adjuster who might not have any designations at all and is working off of maybe a checklist on the other end of their computer. You can sit there and talk to them about how the progressional, and I don't do this with, if I were a public adjuster, right? I don't talk to adjusters from the carrier side, but you can talk to them about how a building breathes, what the stack effect is. A stack effect is a basic principle in building science. And when you've got a building, like you do in Alabama, a lot of them are on crawl spaces, that air underneath the crawl space gets sucked into the main part of the home through that convection process. When you can actually explain that or incorporate it into your protocols in a visual format, it actually embeds that science into what you're talking about in your line of reasoning. So like you said, there's a lot of inconsistency out there. The IICRC just published their S700 and the S720 for wildfires and structure fires. And there's a lot of stuff in there that I agree with some of it, but I think a lot of it's really a little bit vanilla with their their approach to doing things, right? So the point is, we go off of we building science, sampling methodology, and we evaluate every structure individually, because essentially every building operates differently because they're all unique.
And what was your process for kind of combining the building science with the standards and the remediation protocols? Is this something you just knew from experience? Did you kind of work with an engineer initially to try to figure this out, or a building consultant? Because some of the things you guys do, and we've actually had a couple of claims with you guys, are no one else is doing and no one else is analyzing.
Yeah, we've used building consultants. We've consulted with engineers over the past. What we're trying to do is put together the best product that's out there. And it's not just industrial hygiene, right? It involves so many other things. And time is one of those components, right? Time with these materials like combustion byproducts and metals, those materials are corrosive. So the longer they're exposed to maybe metal or glass or non-sealed wood, the more of an effect they're going to have on said material. So you have to take that into consideration when you're evaluating that property. So there are a lot of factors. And then when you loop in the public adjusting component of things and understanding how to document a claim and prepare it properly for claims resolution, that's another factor that we've incorporated into our protocol that I know that our colleagues just don't have.
And before we kind of close, what would be, one or two tips there about preparing a protocol for claims resolution? Obviously, I'm not asking you to give away all your secret sauce, but what are a couple of things you do that you're just like, everyone should do it?
So there was, about 5 years ago, Galen, it was very widely accepted. And I don't know if you've seen this in your practice or not, but I think over the last 4 to 6 years, insurance carriers have gotten much more aware of the amount of money that they're putting into contents replacement and remediation. It used to be a very different world where it almost was rubber stamped. And now they've got it under a microscope. And it used to be with a fire that we'd be able to say, you know what, any kind of porous material, just go ahead and, just replace it and throw it out. Well, we get depoted periodically. And one of the things that when we were talking to our attorneys, because we consult with attorneys regarding our protocols too, we started seeing pushback on the soft goods. And we had a conversation, and the key factor with contents, because I get it all the time from PAs, how come you're not totaling out the contents? Why won't you just put this is a total loss situation with the soft goods? The carriers people did it. Well, that's fine. Let the carriers people opine on it. But if I get put in a deposition where opposing says, how many contents of jobs have you done in the last 3 to 5 weeks? How many have you done in the last year? How many have you done in the last 2 years? And my answer is going to be a big goose egg, right? So then the next question is going to be, then how do you know that everything's non-salvageable? That's a key point right there. So that would be the fundamental basis for trying to disqualify everything that I'm putting forth, because I crossed over into a lane where even though I know what's probably going to happen, I don't have the verified expertise. So expertizing the file is really critical in this day and age, because unless you get a person, now there are a lot of restoration companies out there that say they do contents, but we've got clients who have $250,000 antique Persian rugs out here. Can they be salvaged? Maybe for 50 grand. Can it be proven to be decontaminated? Probably. So are you going to tell me that it's not worth it to spend 50 grand to decontaminate that $250,000 rug?
Yeah, of course it is.
Of course it is. But for the 5-pack of kitchen towels that you got from Target, right? It's probably going to be cheaper, more economical to go and just get new kitchen towels. So it's a case by case, piece by piece thing. And if I were a public adjuster today, I would be building my team, if you're wanting to get into fires, of people who are competent and experienced with contents restoration, because that is going to be a real big snag with a lot of these urban wildfires.
I could not agree more. Jonathan, you've been so helpful. We love working with you. Hopefully our listeners today have gotten some good stuff. But before you go, I have to ask you, what does it mean to you to level up?
Oh, man, I tell you what, 1% better every day. That's been my mantra. And every day, if I'm not getting 1% better, it's not a loss, but I have to re-examine what I didn't do to get to that 1% better.
I could not agree more. Thank you so much,
Hey,
Jonathan.
Galen, I appreciate your inviting me, and thank you for your time.
I'd like to thank Jonathan Bowers for joining us on the show. As you can see, so many people just run into these big fire losses and just kind of draft a protocol. However, are you staying up on the science? Are you surrounding yourself by the right people? You're probably leaving meat on the bone, and frankly, you're putting yourself and your customers at risk. So let's all make sure before we go into these fires, we know what the science shows.
Follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player.